Hey Student Success, this is your video for week 8 lecture. So I'm going to scroll down, click into week 8, and as you can see, we have 2 chapters this week. So I'm going to go through those 2 chapters, and doing so, going into the materials folder. I actually am not going to use these slideshows at all, and I've actually hidden them from your view because I'm just not a big fan of the ones that are uploaded in there, to be quite honest. So I am just going to rely on the actual textbooks, just kind of talking through some of the concepts and showing you a few resources, and that'll be it for the chapter 3 and chapter 9. And then if you kind of caught a quick glimpse there, you have an assignment connected to both of those chapters, a chapter 3 assignment, and then the cultural intelligence survey, which is connected to chapter 9. All right, so chapter 3 is a chapter called Thinking About Thought. So as always, there's, the self-assessments, the goals that you want to go toward when it comes to metacognition is essentially what this is talking about, being aware of your thinking and your goals when it comes to different levels of thinking, whether it's analytical, creative, critical thinking, problem solving, any of those type of things. And so this talks about how, when you're a college student, you should be not just surface level thinking. You should be doing more critical thinking, more, as I said, analytical thinking, doing different types of things that are going to challenge what you know or how you see things. So that's what this chapter is going to talk about, those different levels. So the first section of the chapter does go into these different levels of thinking. If you're familiar with Bloom's taxonomy or Bloom's hierarchy of knowing, this is sometimes it's presented in a pyramid form, but right here we have a table, the different levels of thinking. And so one of the most basic levels of thinking, something that hopefully we all should be able to do, sometimes it's more challenging than others, but to remember and then recall information. That's the basic form of thinking. From there, obviously, we can recall it or memorize it, but then do we understand it? Are we able to explain it? Are we able to really kind of be able to tell someone about it? Then from there, can we apply it in different situations? Can we analyze it? Can we break it into part, look at the different pieces, how they all work together? And then the highest levels of thinking are evaluating and creating. And so you can see what all of these levels involve. And then there is kind of something to think about. Do you use all of these skills? In what ways do you use these skills? In what ways do you analyze, apply, understand? And so there's a really optional thought inventory there about, do you use these different levels of thinking, these ways of knowing? And then here are some verbiage that goes along with these. And some of this might look familiar because you had to do this with a previous assignment, come up with a verb that was part of an essay question. But here are verbs connected to these different levels of thinking. Okay, so that's the recap on just understanding that there are different levels when it comes to the thinking process. All right, this next section talks about critical thinking in particular, and this is something I talk with my reading classes often is we're all proficient readers. However, we want to be more critical. We want to be able to question, to dig deeper, to really understand what we're reading and look at it from different perspectives. Look to see what the author's purpose is, their thesis, their tone, supporting details, all of those things, especially when we have access to so much information. I mean, look at this right here, how much access we have to, internet sites. And so just really understanding that not everything we consume in terms of what we read and see and think and hear is quality information, and how we really critically think about that. And that also plays a role in decision making in different areas of our life too, and problem solving, which this chapter talks about. So this talks a little bit more about the critical thinking process, and how you can go through and be a more critical thinker, really understanding, and they kind of connect this to problem solving and asking questions. What are you doing? What are you considering? Looking at different options, looking and evaluating the information. And so really understanding, again, as I said, that not all information is quality information. When we do come across information, especially if we're just accessing it online versus maybe a more reliable, trusted source, are there fallacies? A fallacy is an error in reasoning. And these are a bunch of different types of fallacies. I mean, there's a whole table here. So a fallacy is something that at first appears to be reasonable or appears to be true, but then after closer examination, there's some kind of error. So maybe there's a generalization where there's an assumption about a whole group based on just a little sample. Or maybe this bandwagon, this everyone's doing it. So, everyone does this, no one does that. Well, that's not true. That's a fallacy. Unless you can prove it 100% that no one or everyone, then it's a fallacy. So these are just different types of errors that you want to be aware of, that sometimes authors will include in an argument or include in a source, and you just need to be kind of cognizant so that you are critically evaluating that information. And this just gives a little bit more tips and information on critical thinking. So if you feel like you maybe could brush up on your critical thinking, or you become a better, more involved critical thinker, then this is a nice section to review. And honestly, this is something that in your classes is probably talked about quite frequently, even if it's not addressed 100% as critical thinking exercises. When you are doing problem solving, when you are doing hypothesizing, when you're working in groups, a lot of times that critical thinking comes into play. Here's a little section on evaluation, especially if you're getting information online. This is a nice little piece, looking at the domain, looking at the organization, the author, the date of publication, the purpose, all of this. So this is a nice kind of piece to look at when you are evaluating information. This next section talks about creative thinking, and actually your chapter 3 assignment is going to be a creative assignment, creative thinking assignment. So sometimes people think that creative thinking is either like something you have or you don't, and there's no way around it. You have it or you don't. And that's not true. Creative thinking is not always something that you're just born with, and if you don't have it, you're out of luck, because you can hone that skill. And so this is what this section is all about. Like, how do you go ahead and do that? Well, right here, you feed your curiosity, you read, you find information, you try to become flexible, and knowing that there's not always just one answer to every problem or every issue. You look at different options. You think of how to do things in a new, different way. Think in metaphors and ask a lot of questions. Children are great creative thinkers because they ask a lot of questions. If you've ever been around a bunch of children for a long time, it's one of their favorite things to do is ask questions, and that's how they learn about the world. And so we don't want that to go away as adults. We still want to ask questions, and that's how we can problem solve. That's how we can think critically. That's how we can be creative in our thinking. And here's like a little just fun little exercise, and this is actually going to be part of your assignment. So I'll touch on that in my assignment video. Okay. This last section then talks about problem solving and decision making, and this is where kind of all of it comes together, right? To make good decisions, to problem solve, you have to not only think critically, you also sometimes have to think creatively, and so this kind of all comes together. And so let's say you have a problem, let's keep it somewhat simple. Should you take summer classes or not? So what's the problem? Oh, I need to work, but I also want to get ahead. Narrow the problem down. I might not have enough time in the summer to take classes. Generate possible solutions. All right, well, maybe I can work part-time and go to school part-time. So like just really thinking through, and of course you would spend more time than what I just did here, but that's a little mini example. So really thinking through these different steps of defining the problem, and there's lots of questions to ask yourself as you define. Narrow your problem down and then generate some solutions, and then choose a solution. And something else, reflect back. Was it the right decision to make? And then this section goes into decision making, how to make a good decision, what to do, how to reflect. So there's a little bit more information there. And that is chapter 3. So I encourage you to take a look through chapter 3 more in depth, especially if you feel like maybe you struggle with critical thinking or problem solving or whatever that might be. All right, and then chapter 9, this is the social world of college. So for all of you, this is the last week of the semester, but maybe you haven't really focused on the social aspect because maybe you're still a high school student, or you've just been really overwhelmed with getting your first semester under your belt. So just thinking of this maybe moving forward, how can you become more socially integrated with this campus, or maybe if you transfer to another institution. So there's again, the self-assessment, where you want to go with it, and just tying how, sometimes people don't consider the social component because we are at a 2-year school, but social life and social interactions are really important still at a 2-year institution. So this section talks about getting along with others. And I know that sounds kind of funny, we're all adults, but sometimes it's difficult to get along with people. I mean, even if you live with someone, whether that's a spouse, children, a parent, that's also part of like getting along with others. So who you live with, who you work with. So this just goes through like when we have issues, how do we navigate around that, the value and the importance of interacting with people. If you struggle to make new friends, again, I know this sounds silly, but I'll use my example. Like as a mom, sometimes it's difficult to meet other moms. I'm super busy. I've got a lot of things going on with my children. And so sometimes I make new mom friends. And so it's kind of a challenge whenever you are meeting new people, very awkward or, so depending on where you are in your life, whether you're a younger person, you're a parent, you're an older student, these are just kind of tips on how to do that, especially maybe you're shy. So a little bit of tips there. Communication is a big part of social interaction, obviously, as well, both verbal and nonverbal. So this section goes into kind of paying attention and honing in on how to be a better communicator. So talking less and listening more, not just talking to someone and waiting your turn to respond, but really listening so that you have meaningful interactions, asking questions, paying attention to body language, making sure that you are, if there's kind of you're learning something about someone or you're meeting someone, like looking for honest ground, be honest, not critical, common ground today. So just a lot of information. This is one I honestly struggle with. I'm a very sarcastic person. And so I have to check that very often when I'm in social situations around people I don't know. I have to kind of like rein that in a little bit. So really looking through there if you feel like that's something that you struggle with. Online social networking, these are some good tips in general. I know this really talks about, this is kind of an older reference here, but I think this still really holds true. 90%, substitute those for TikTok, for Instagram, or whatever you want to put in its place. Most, not all, most college age and older students are on some form of social media. And so this just kind of talks about capitalizing on that and using it to your advantage and interacting in an appropriate and healthy way on there. This section talks about balancing schoolwork and social life. Again, some of you might have different responsibilities pulling you in different ways. Add work on top of that, add family obligations on top of that. So we're really being pulled, 15 different ways. And so these are just tips I think that could work in lots of those situations. Really, prioritizing, scheduling, learning how to say no, but also giving yourself time. We do not have Greek life in terms of fraternities and sororities, but you may go to an institution that does. So there's just a little bit information there. Resolving conflicts if you feel like you are not great at that. This is a nice area. And I feel like sometimes currently in our society, a lot of people do have struggles with this. Getting along, being respectful. If you don't see eye to eye with someone, how to still disagree with them, but in a respectful way. So this whole section really goes into a lot of detail with that. Roommate issues, if you have roommate issues, I do with my 3 little roommates. Kidding, my children. How to navigate that. And again, we're not a residential campus, but if you are in that situation, no matter if your roommate is, again, your partner, your spouse, your children, this goes into just helping out with that. Issues with harassment, family relationships. So a lot of, I think, just helpful information for different interactions that we have in our life. This section talks about living with diversity. For a lot of people, when they come to a 2 or 4 year institution, it's the first time that they are really introduced to a lot of people of diverse backgrounds. And what does that mean? So this gives a whole list of what they mean by diversity. Sometimes when we hear or think the word diversity, we think of the things we can see on the outside. Someone's race, someone's ethnicity, someone's gender, someone's age, those things. But there are a lot of things that encompass diversity that you can't see. Where someone is from, what their socioeconomic background is, their educational background, their orientation, their religion, all of those things are those things that you cannot see, but still makes us diverse. And in that way, we all have diversity and different things to bring to the table. And so this is a list, and it's not complete by any means because there's lots of different ways. But this is just a list to think about diversity in those different ways and the benefits of diversity, and how when we do come across people that have these different background experiences than us, it's often jarring at first because maybe we're used to just our certain town or a certain group of friends, and then we come to an institution and we have these people of all these different varied backgrounds, but it allows you to really kind of look at things from a different perspective. It allows you to consider things from alternate point of views in more creative or critical ways, allows you to see a broader view of the world, but also depending on who you're interacting with, just of yourself as well. And it allows you to allow what you know and how you see the world to be shared. So there's a whole list of just benefits of diversity. If you're a non-traditional student, meaning you're not right out of high school, that's a form of diversity, a non-traditional student. And so the benefits of those type of students is displayed right here. And just making sure that we are acknowledging and working and celebrating diversity, again, because we all have different backgrounds, different views, different beliefs. And in that way, we all have something to offer, the interactions that we have with our classmates, with our friends, with our instructors. So I think that's really important to kind of acknowledge, and that's what this says right here. Acknowledge that we're diverse, each one of us, and how we have maybe some biases or some stereotypes, and sometimes we need to challenge those or think about why we hold those. I like this, like a little bit of body language differences and how we can respect those ways. This is a little optional activity just to kind of see how you would respond in different situations, or how you would react if you saw someone responding in those ways, and how we can kind of challenge whenever we see things that are maybe disrespectful towards people or groups that are considered diverse or different than us, and how we can, again, challenge those different things, whether it's prejudice or hate speech or whatever that might look like. All right, this last section talks about campus groups and being involved, and this is where in our Week 8 materials folder, you will see a link to student organizations. You can click right there. You can also go to the Stark State homepage under info for current students, and you can also get to it from there. So a couple different places. Either way, here's a list of all our student organizations. I may have talked about this one other time, but just in case, we have a ton of organizations on campus. And if anyone was around for Spring Fling, I believe a few of you were, because I think at least one of you in here, I saw your name as a winner of a gift card, which was exciting to see. But if you have been around on campus or have seen notifications going out, a lot of these organizations are starting to get going again. COVID obviously slowed down some of our organizations, some of our activities and things like that. But these organizations and clubs are starting again, and you can see, just kind of scrolling through the list, some of them are career related. If you're going into human and social services, if you're going into culinary, some of them are just for fun. We have a comic book club, we have a gamers guild. Either way, there's a researcher out of Syracuse University, Vincent Tinto, and his whole thing is about engagement with community colleges, because community colleges typically do not have dormitories. Students often feel disconnected because they go to class, they go home, they go to class, they go home. But his research supports the fact that the more connected and involved students are to their campus, the more likely they are to graduate and have higher GPAs, because they have a sense of belonging. And so I know sometimes that might seem kind of counterintuitive, like, well, wait a minute, if I'm involved in campus groups, isn't that taking away time from studying or time from family or whatever that might be? Yes or no. It just kind of depends on how you prioritize and how you see things. So if you can make the time, some of these groups only meet once or twice a month, and some of them hold family-friendly activities. But again, you're networking, you're interacting with people who have similar beliefs as you, and you can build that into your resume, you can build it into your schedule. So it's just something to kind of think about. So I encourage you to take a look and see if there's anything. You can click on it and it'll give you, this is a nice long description here. You can get the description, see who the advisors are, contact them and say, hey, are you meeting, or what are you thinking about for the fall, since obviously spring semester is almost over. But this section goes on again through, tips on why it is important to get involved, and just kind of prioritizing and making sure that you're not overwhelming yourself as well. All right, that is all for your lecture for Week 8, your very last lecture video. So I will be coming back here with your Week 8 assignment video shortly.